This video contains spoilers for Season 2, Episode 10 of Fiona and Cake. You have been warned. We immediately jump into a familiar place that we've seen in Season 1. This is Upton, the floating island that the new human inhabitants built on Ooo, and where Simon Petrikov now lives. But if you notice, this Upton is not floating, and that's because this is a flashback, because we see an alive and healthy Finn. This is a flashback to the early beginnings of when the humans first arrived on Ooo, and Finn's helping them out, setting everything up. But before we can actually get into the juicy parts of this episode, we cut to the title card of this episode. The finale, the bear and the rose. We cut back to Upton, but this time in the present. As we can see, it's floating and we see a dying Finn. Now, if you remember back to the previous episode, Princess Bubblegum's new plan was to contact Minerva. Now, she didn't say why, but we could have all guessed that there was really no hope for Finn, and the only way to keep him somewhat alive was to upload his consciousness into the computer like Minerva had done. And that's exactly what we see here. Now, I want you to look at Finn's dying character design. They are intentionally making him look the exact same way we see his dead old man version in Together Again. From the very beginning of this episode, it's pretty certain that Finn will die. And what comes next is probably one of the saddest moments in the entire series altogether. I was genuinely shedding some tears after watching this, and I still do sometimes after rewatching it. But before we can get into the actual saddest part of this episode, we need to catch up with Huntress Wizard. As we know from the last episode, she was unable to travel back to Ooo after the Star Universe portal disintegrated on her. So she uses the pose that she learned from the Spirit Warriors training and accesses that root multiverse thing that we saw back in episode 3. It seems that it is its own thing and that only green wizards can access through. So she tries to find her way back to Ooo through this. And we see a ton of new universes. The first one is a pretty familiar one. This is the Vampire Universe from the episode The Star in Season 1. The second one is a brand new universe that seems to be this world covered in water along with floating water spheres all over the place, and who looks like its sole inhabitant is this big giant creature who looks pretty interesting and kind of familiar. Now, immediately you see the crown on his head and you see that he's blue, so you might think that it's just another version of an Ice King, but then you look at the form that Finn took in the episode Don't Look, and it looks almost identical, down to the long beard and mustache, but specifically those shoulder things popping out. Now, Finn took this form because it reminded him of Martin, his father. So does that mean that this is a version of Martin Mertens who ends up ruling a water-covered universe? Could be. Or it could just be an entirely new character. Then we arrive back in Farm World, and it is officially confirmed that Finn did marry this universe's Huntress Wizard because one of their kids gets all excited that his mom is back, only for her mom to disappear and die once again. We revisit the baby universe once more. Then we see another new universe, and it appears that it is out in space because Huntress Wizard immediately dies from lack of oxygen. Now, technically we've seen this before. As we can see, Huntress Wizard is growing out of all of her seeds, and when her seeds got transported across all the different universes, we did see this universe, although we really don't get any more new information after this. Now, this is where it gets a little more interesting. We revisit the Winter King's universe, and we see that Princess Bubblegum is now thriving after being freed from the curse, and she introduces Finn, and we find out that Finn is dating Slime Princess in this universe, which is a bit odd because up until this point we assumed that Finn and Huntress Wizard were always destined to be, but it seems like in this universe things were a little different. Although, of course, Finn is still missing his arm in this universe, as with every single universe. Now, Huntress Wizard is not able to travel back to Ooo because her original body in Ooo was exploded, so she ends up going to the Witch Wizard for help because the Witch Wizard can still connect back to Ooo. And she has this little redemption arc where they become allies for a little bit, long enough to get this really cool sequence of them traveling through the heart of the forest. And this entire thing is just so beautiful and so well animated. It looks amazing. Again, we see that they are traveling through this new root multiverse dimension, and they are going to end up in Ooo, but before we figure out what happens, we cut to probably the saddest part of this episode and probably the entire series. We are now back in Upton in Minerva's robot room, and they decided to go through with uploading Finn's consciousness on the computer, and they hold this sort of memorial thing as they load up his body into the coffin. And during this entire time, they are singing the song Sleepy Puppies, which we first heard in the episode Jake versus Meow, and it was Margaret's lullaby. Margaret, of course, being Finn and Jake's mom, but they both heavily loved this song, and just hearing it as as they lay Finn on his deathbed is such a sad thing to see. I can't really emphasize how sad this whole sequence is without you actually watching it yourself. It's genuinely heartbreaking. And as we see Finn's body literally getting crushed by this coffin, we see where Huntress Wizard and the Witch Wizard ended up. And she literally ends up sprouting out of Finn's dying body, which is probably and most likely the reference to the title of this episode, The Bear and the Rose. Finn was fighting the bear in season 1, which ended up causing him to get poisoned by the Heart of the Forest. And as we can see, Huntress Wizard uses the Heart of the Forest to finally make her way back to Finn, literally out of Finn. And we can see the portal that opens is in the shape of a rose. So now Huntress Wizard finally reunites with Finn. However, now she has to save him. And we see that Bimo is willing to sacrifice his life in every single universe. Back in season 1, in the Death universe, where the Lich ended up winning, Bimo sacrificed his life in order to help Fiona, Simon, and Cake. And he's the first one willing to give up his life again in order to save Finn. Fortunately, Huntress Wizard does not have to use Bimo and ends up using all of her bodies across all of the universes that she travels to in order to give Finn life. And the way she does this is by accessing her hand that was originally used when she first became a green wizard. If you notice, that is the same background that we saw in her background story. And this seemed to have finally worked. All of Huntress Wizard's hard work has finally paid off, or has it? While Finn's body looks healthy, his soul is still missing. And this is where Huntress Wizard really shows off her smarts. She immediately contacts Cake in order to try to contact Fiona. Because if you think about it, why didn't Huntress Wizard just try to find Finn's soul? Well, it's because she thinks that Fiona will be one of the only people that will be able to get through to him, as they are experiencing something very similar. And as we'll see, that's probably the case. But before we can see that, we find out where Fiona actually is. And Fiona has a very character growing moment. She straight up states that she feels like she's been forcing this happy ending, that this entire season she's been trying to prove something to herself. And that's exactly what we've seen. And she got too into it, ignoring all of her friends' feelings. But the biggest moment of growth happens when she rejects Felix. But Cake finally reaches Fiona through one of the rose bushes, because if you remember, the Heart of the Forest is literally every rose bush in Fiona's universe. And it's revealed that Fiona can also access the minds of anyone that she has connected with previously, which is exactly what she does in order to contact Finn. And this is where we get into some deep psychological stuff. She successfully reaches Finn's mind, and we get introduced to a character that we saw all the way back in season 1 of Adventure Time. Because Fiona isn't in Finn's mind yet. Fiona is in Finn's imagination land. Because the character that we get introduced to is none other than Bellamy Bug, along with the lyre player in the background. But we last saw these two characters in the episode Rainy Day Daydream, and they make a reappearance. And the Bellamy Bug ends up guiding Fiona to Finn's mind, where we see that there's actually a hole in the wall behind a poster. So Fiona travels through it, and we get a bunch of callbacks to Finn's life, starting with the tunnel that Fiona crawls down. This is a callback to the tunnel that Finn crawled down in the episode Dentist, followed by the dimensional portal to the Pillow World, the same one that we saw Finn crawl down in the episode Pahoy. Then we see her crawling through Lemongrab's castle, which is a reference to what Finn and Jake did back in the episode All Your Fault, which leads her into the guts of the monster from the episode Belly of the Beast, the same way that we saw Finn run through it. Then we see her slide down a pole, which is in the same room that we saw Finn slide down with Fern in the episode 3 Buckets, the episode where Fern tried to kill Finn. Then we see her walking down a stairwell with Tree Root behind her. This is of course a reference to where Nettie resides in the Candy Kingdom and the passage that leads down to him. Then we see her falling down a well with sand, which is another reference to the episode Dentist. And then we see her continue to fall through the same pit that we saw in Mortal Folly, the pit that the Lich was drawing his power from, and the same pit that we see in the episode Whispers, to which she finally ends up in Finn's heart. Now, we see in Finn's heart that there are 4 layers, and from what we can see, it seems that all of the items in his heart are the things that he cherished the most. Because when Fiona makes her way to the 3rd layer, there is a picture of Jake on the wall, along with the treehouse, and the rug on the floor looks like Jake's muzzle, all of which are things that Finn cherishes the most. And it turns out under this Jake muzzle carpet is the trapdoor to the final layer of his heart, and where we see even more of his cherished items. Starting from the bottom right, we see a piece of meatloaf, which he loves, along with the flute that he performed on with Huntress Wizard in the episode Flute Spell. And then going to the left, that teddy bear sitting on top of the chest is the same teddy bear that was given to him when he was a baby, and finally ending off with the Finn sword, which we know he cherishes a lot. Fiona ends up finding Finn in this blue chest, and this is where it's finally revealed why picking Fiona was probably the best option in order to help Finn get out of this place. They share a very similar guilt but also different. Fiona tells Finn that there's a lot of people waiting for him to come back, and Finn states that he doesn't feel that way. Again, this also confirms that Jake is pretty much dead, because he tells Fiona that no one loved him like Jake did, which is why he doesn't feel that that love is reciprocated by all the people waiting for him to come back in Ooh. And this is somewhat similar to Fiona's story. After Fiona literally saved her entire universe, she was pretty much universally loved by everybody, except for Queenie, of course, but she didn't feel that. So she tried her hardest trying to feel something similar to that. She literally said that she was trying to force a happy ending because she didn't feel that love from everybody in her universe. We see another similarity in their stories. Finn doesn't feel worthy enough to be with Huntress Wizard. He literally says that she's a wise wizard and he's just a dumb baby. Again, this is very similar to how Fiona feels. She feels that she's not equipped for the world and that all of her friends are going to leave her behind. She didn't feel worthy enough to be their friends. This is also finally Fiona's turning point. After Finn asks her if she's scared, and instead of pushing that all down, she finally admits it. She is. And this is exactly what I thought in the previous episode, but when Huntress Wizard told Fiona that she wasn't the broken tool, you could see the look on her face alone proved to her that something changed. And that's exactly what she says. She learned from Huntress Wizard to listen to her friends better, to show them that she cares when they need it the most, because that's not what she has been doing. As we know, her entire goal during this season has been to save the sweet spot, but that transformed into saving the sweet spot for herself instead of Gary and Marshall. And after the events of the previous episode with Huntress Wizard, she has finally learned from her mistakes and has admitted that she was in the wrong, which she has been avoiding this entire season. I think this also proves that Huntress Wizard chose Fiona for a reason. This entire season, she has refused to change, refused to admit any wrongdoing, so when she finally does, that gives Finn the courage to change as well. And that's exactly what gets him to come back, for his soul to go back to his body. And that's exactly what happens. So is Finn finally saved now? After 10 long episodes? Yes, Finn is finally saved. PB, of course, breaks down because she was the one who wanted to upload Finn's consciousness to the computer, which would kill him. And we see that Marceline gives the crown to Peppermint Butler, which is foreshadowing to what we see in the episode Together Again, when we see Peppermint Butler as the new ruler of the Candy Kingdom. And also hints of the episode of Varmints that PB is finally willing to relinquish some control over her kingdom and finally just relax. Then we get a random cameo of Lady Rainicorn, which we haven't seen for a while, but the odd thing about this is that she looks kind of happy, which you would assume would not be the case after your husband had died, but this is most likely something the Adventure Time crew threw in as a picking up point if they get renewed for season 3, where we could potentially explore more of Jake and Lady Rainicorn's relationship, which could lead an explanation to Jake's death. But then we cut back to Gary and Marshall, and Fiona is trying to make amends by baking them a cake. And this is again where we see her growth as a character. They straight up tell Fiona that this is not enough for what she has done, and instead of trying to prove herself even more, she accepts it and is ready to move on. But then it turns out that this gesture seemed to be somewhat of enough, as this is going to be the starting point of their relationship beginning to heal. This is also where we see a montage of her beginning to make amends for all of her relationships that she has ruined. We also get a shot of Prismo, who of course is not doing well after 2 of his best friends have died, although technically the Cosmic Owl is back, but it seems like the Scarab and Prismo will start to have a new budding friendship. But the Scarab being here is interesting because when he was in the interrogation room, it straight up looked like he had dipped, but it turns out he just returned to the time room. So props to him, I guess, which could also explain that maybe this Scarab is starting to genuinely care for Prismo, because after receiving his crystal, he probably had the power to go anywhere into the universe, but he chose to go back to the time room to console Prismo. We end off on this little montage back in Huntress Wizard's house tree room thing, and she has become a green wizard teacher. This is of course another starting off point that they can pick back up from if they get renewed for a season 3, but Finn is also here, and he has a new axe mod on his arm, which he says it came to him in a dream, which we know it actually did because during his croak dreams, he ends up meeting Farm World Finn, and Farm World Finn has this exact same axe mod for his arm. Then we see that the Spirit Warrior is looking in on all of this, and he seems pretty impressed by what Huntress Wizard has done, but it still makes you wonder if the Spirit Warrior is a good guy or bad guy, because during the Heart of the Forest's flashback, we saw that the Spirit Warrior was the one who led the bandits to him in the first place, and then he just straight up dipped, and after he sees Astrid adventuring in the distance, it seems that Astrid will be his new mentee, but there's this strange feeling about it that doesn't seem all that good. Again, another picking up point if they get renewed for a season 3, but it makes you wonder. The sweet spot has finally been rebuilt, and it looks like it's thriving. It also seems that Fiona has made amends to pretty much all of her relationships, and as she's reminiscing on all of the success, she comes across Peach Street, which reminds her of something that was said in one of the pain orbs: go beyond the end of the peach, which we first heard in the previous episode, episode 9, but we first saw in the intro sequence of episode 7 when we see LSP's dream of one of the Venusians. So it's interesting that one of these Venusians told LSP to tell them about going beyond the peach, because how would they know? I'm a bit confused on this, but I feel like all the pieces are there to figure it out. So if you know, please let me know. But what exactly is beyond the peach? Well, Fiona finds out, and it turns out it's this entire uninhabited world. And as we zoom out to see her entire planet, we see that her city is the only thing on this entire planet, which of course makes sense canonically. Fiona's universe was originally Prismo's creation, and Prismo had only created the city and nothing else. But when Fiona finally made her universe its own thing, there had to be more after that. So an entire world was generated around her city. But something that we can also see in the background is this blue flash, which in Adventure Time, something that you see in space that looks like a blue flash means that it's most likely a catalyst comet. It's a blue catalyst comet, which sort of represents the reincarnations of Finn, but with Fiona already being there, it's a bit interesting on what this could mean for the future. But there's one final thing in this episode. Marshall is back on the same street that he was on in episode 1, performing again on his guitar. This is also when we see a human gender bent version of Tree Trunks walk by, but there's another character that we haven't seen before who walks up to Marshall Lee, and it's none other than Hunson Abadir, the same Hunson Abadir from Ooh, mind you, showing up to greet who is technically his son. Now, how Hunson ended up here, we actually might be able to see. We can see in the alley, this is the fill face that is used to open a portal to the Nightosphere. So maybe he came out of this, but it's interesting that he can create portals across different multiverses. Of course, we don't know if that's the case, but again, this is a starting off point if they get renewed for season 3, and if they do, it seems like we will be learning a bit more about the Nightosphere and Hunson Abadir. But with that comes the end of Fiona and Cake season 2. I'm gonna make a separate video about my thoughts on season 2 as a whole. Spoiler alert, I like season 2 a lot, but I just want to thank you all for being here and showing up to my videos. I know this one is very late, so if you celebrated Christmas, Merry late Christmas. And like I said before, thank you all so much for showing up and watching these videos. They're so fun to make, and I'm so glad that I can have an audience to share them with. If you didn't know, I pretty much make Adventure Time videos, although I am looking to expand out. So if you don't want to miss future ones, make sure to subscribe. From the bottom of my heart, I truly do appreciate every single one of you. So thank you. But as always, stay adventurous.